Mr. Matsunaga, thank you so much for joining us. 2 years have passed since the start of Joe Biden presidency, and the United States midterm election is approaching. Is upcoming. It seems that the current American government is facing big problems in different parts of the world, including the Middle East. What do you think is the American biggest challenge in the Middle East?
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. I am very glad to be here at the IQNA. About your question, I think we can't just talk about the Middle East alone because it's connected to the bigger problem in the world. So for the Biden administration, the biggest problem that it's facing in the world is the Russian war in Ukraine. And in the Middle East, I think at least diplomatically, the biggest challenge for the Biden administration is the Iran, the negotiation toward returning to the JCPOA. So somehow in their mind, these two issues are connected. For the Americans, bigger problem is the Russian war in Ukraine, or too short, Russia. Problem is the Russia. And in the Middle East, for the American perspective, the issues related to Iran. One of them is the nuclear issue. And yes, can I go
Yes,
explain more? So the diplomatically, the U.S. The Biden administration since its beginning in January 2001, 2021 has been trying to come back to the nuclear deal. At the same time, trying to negotiate with Iran and other partners to the right balance, how to get back to this agreement. So with that, actually, the Biden administration has two major challenges. One is to coordinate and then try to negotiate the exact terms of the deal with Iran. That's one challenge. The other challenge is domestic American problem, how to promote and sell the deal when it has a deal to the Congress, American Congress. And as you know, the American Congress is opposed to any return or any concession to Iranian government.
And also the Ukrainian war, right?
Right, but let me finish the Iran part. So the congressional opposition to the Iranian deal, potential deal, is bipartisan, which means that not only Republican Party senators, but the Democratic Party senators, for example, New York State Senator Charles Schumer or New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, he's the chairman of Foreign Relations Committee, both of them are strongly opposed to any deal with Iran. So which is a huge challenge. Even though President Biden is Democratic Party leader, his own party members, very influential senators, are opposed to deal. So politically, of course, the president has a higher authority. So when president agrees or decides to have an Iran deal again this year, yes, he can push it domestically, but at a large cost. So the question is whether President Biden wants to pay that cost domestically, right? So he has two major problems. One problem is to negotiate the small details with Iran, which may be able to be done, or at the moment there are some texts which I heard which is very good, and their differences have been narrowed over the last 8-9 months of the negotiation. So the diplomatic negotiation part is very close to the end, but the domestic part hasn't started yet, and it has a bigger challenge. And as you mentioned in the questions, the midterm election is coming, so that's a huge challenge. And let me go back to the Russia's war and its connection to Iran. From the American point of view, the nuclear negotiation is only one challenge with regard to Iran, which means that America has different issues with Iranian influence in the region, for example, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and so on, and Syria. So somehow, if the Russia is busy in Ukraine, Russia is going to change its role in the Middle East. And from American point of view, Iran is changing its role in the region accordingly because Russia's role is changing a little bit.
And let's back to the Afghanistan.
Okay.
After 20 years of American occupation in Afghanistan and withdrawal from this country last year, and it's happened very fast. The question that arises is whether the American war in Afghanistan is successful, and whether this war has ended with a wider peace, or are terrorists and militia groups in Afghanistan isolated or not? Do you think the American withdrawal was right or not?
Short answer is that America failed in this 20-year experience. I think, in my view, there are two reasons why the America failed to achieve any positive objective. One of them is that they defined their engagement in Afghanistan as part of their effort called war on terrorism. So it was not for the Afghan people. It was not for the Afghanistan. It was not for the region around Afghanistan. It was for the United States, and the way they define their efforts is they're simply fighting against terrorism. And one of the problems is that one of the consequences of that mistake was that they didn't distinguish Al-Qaeda and Taliban, right? So Taliban became U.S. enemy. That was a mistake, first of all. And they didn't help the Afghan government, like Hukumat Bumi, Afghanistan. So it was not their goal. They assisted the Karzai and the Ashraf Ghani government to the extent they can do this war on terror. Helping them was not the primary purpose. That was one problem. Second problem, when they decided they want to get out, they want to exit Afghanistan. So Trump administration and Biden administration have the same approach.
So the policy was same.
No, let me finish. This is important. So when they wanted to exit, they didn't negotiate with Ashraf Ghani. They negotiated with Taliban. Taliban was supposed to be enemy.
It looks like they ignore the Afghan government, right?
Right. That's the second problem. Therefore, first, the definition of the activities was a mistake. Secondly, despite that, they negotiated with Taliban to exit. Therefore, Ashraf Ghani government collapsed, right? So what was the point of these 20 years? It was complete failure.
So the isolated terrorist groups is not the purpose. I mean, the isolation is not happening, right?
They killed lots of insurgents. They have managed to push those insurgents away. But then, if the goal was to achieve peace and security in the cities in Afghanistan, gradually it becomes clear that there are lots of bombings and terror incidents. So they have not succeeded. But overall, yes, they pushed the insurgents and the sideline, but that wasn't the point. You shouldn't invade a country to do the war on terror. That's not a good thing at all, first of all.
It looks some believe that the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, it looks like they transfer the problems of, especially the security problems in Afghanistan, to the other country in the region, such as Iran, Pakistan, China, and even Russia, India, and some other country. What do you think about that?
Um, I don't agree with the view because today the problem of Afghanistan is the internal issue. So the government is not stable. Government doesn't have good strategy. Government meaning de
And
facto.
also not recognized by the
Right.
other governments.
Well, that's not the big problem. But first of all, the de facto government of Afghanistan today is Taliban, right? Emirate Islam. So they don't have the control of the country. They don't have the good strategy for governing. They don't have good policy. They don't have good personnel. So the number one problem in Afghanistan results from the lack of capacity, lack of planning, lack of capability on the de facto government, right? So it's not the security problems around Afghanistan is big challenge. It's not. Comparatively, the biggest challenge is inside Afghanistan. And the de facto government is incapable of dealing with it. And as a result, some citizens of Afghanistan is moving, exiting from Afghanistan. There are lots of migrants from Afghanistan in Iran right now. That's not a security problem. It's a different human problem. I don't call them refugees because there's no situation, bad situation in Afghanistan. They are voluntarily leaving the country, even though Taliban says, please stay. This is your country. You don't need to go. But they choose to go out. So this is not refugees. It's some emigration, migration. That's not security problem. So right now, security problem is inside. Like Taliban government is facing some security problem. But Iran or Tajikistan is not facing security problem right now. I don't know about the future, but right now, I don't think that's a good way to describe it.
For the last question, what change do you think we see in the foreign policy in the U.S. government in the Middle East if the Republican win in the upcoming midterm elections?
I think it will become a stalemate. Biden administration cannot achieve anything big because there will be a domestic political opposition to anything, including the Iran deal. So, which means that the Biden administration's capacity will be decreased significantly. And if they lose the midterm, if the Democratic Party loses and President Biden's influence will be decreased, what they need to do, their challenge will become domestic. They don't have time for foreign policy. And if they have time, they have to work on Russia and the war in Ukraine. So they will not pay attention to the Middle East.
Okay. For last question, what change do you think we see in foreign policy in the U.S. government in the Middle East if the Republicans win the upcoming midterm elections?
If the Republican wins, that means that their influence, political influence will be much more significantly bigger domestically, as well as in terms of foreign policy, which means that the Biden administration will not be able to achieve anything it wants to. If the Republicans control the Congress, that they will oppose any initiative by President Biden, including the Iran deal, which means that the negotiation will be either terminated or postponed until the 2024 elections. Also, if the Republican wins, Biden administration has to work domestically to win the next election, which means they have to focus on domestic policy rather than foreign policy. So in the foreign policy, they have to work on Russia and Russia's war in Ukraine. And then that's probably enough for them. They don't have time for anything else, which means that they will just leave the Middle East alone.
Anything else, Mr. Yasuyuki?
Yes. I think that I come from outside and I'm visiting Iran. So the news, any news about Iran outside is always negative. And people should visit Iran and they should see what's happening inside Iran, the condition that people are facing, and rethink their policy from the beginning. Because what they are saying and what they're trying to achieve is not particularly reasonable. There's a huge gap between what they're talking about.
You mean the media?
No, the foreign countries. The European countries, America, other countries who think that some countries in the region, they talk about Iran as a threat and Iran as a problem, right? That they completely bypass the people of Iran. There are government of Iran, there are people of Iran. So when they talk about Iran, they should combine these two, and they should have more reasonable policy and understanding and views toward Iran. Then otherwise, if they don't do it, the so-called problem regarding Iran will not be solved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.